Okay, I want to welcome everyone here tonight. I want to welcome those that's watching us on YouTube. We appreciate you being here. We will be covering the news rather quickly tonight because we're working to finish up our Jonathan Cahn Josiah manifesto that we've been working on, the book we've been working on for the last several months. We're going to finish that up through tonight and tomorrow and next week. Then we'll be done with that. So those that on home that aren't able to watch this because we can't replay it legally on YouTube. If any of you at home would like to watch these CDs, I'd be glad to share them with you. Just meet me at church and ask, and I can sign them out to you. And it's a very interesting process. So that's open to anybody who'd like to watch them. Pastor Tom, you'd like to start us off tonight?
Father, thank you, Lord, for this time we've had with you. Father, it's always a pleasure, Lord, to be in your word. Always a pleasure to meet together and assemble together. And Father, we don't want to take for granted the opportunity we have to be able to assemble together freely. Tonight we ask, Lord, in Jesus' precious name as always, that you would teach this class. Help us to understand what your word says and understand the signs of the time. Father, we give you the praise and the glory and the honor forever. Amen.
Amen. We'll jump into the Mideast here right quickly. Like I said, we're going to kind of go through this rather rapidly, but here's the main thing that's happening. The war in Israel is heating up even more today. Just before it came in, I read an article where Hezbollah is moving in Syria, and Israel's been striking in Syria, been striking in Lebanon, and that just continues to heat up day by day. But the really big news is today, it happened last night, yesterday, and today. It's kind of funny, not funny, but Hamas made a huge mistake. We've been talking about Israel moving into Rafah. It's right down the border between, if you look on the map, between Egypt and Israel, so it's right on the border. And that's the last big city that Israel hasn't been in. And that's where they know that a lot of the Hamas are, the stronghold for them now, and they feel that a lot of the hostages are there. So that's been the key of contention between especially Biden of the United States and the Western world and Israel. They're saying that Israel's got to stop. In fact, the United States will be promoting a ceasefire resolution at the UN, I think tomorrow. It's either tomorrow or Saturday. And it's just been the hostility between Israel and the United States and Israel and the rest of the world has just been increasing on a daily basis. Israel's saying, we're not backing off. And I don't believe they will. They can't. But here's the interesting thing. Hamas made a huge mistake. There's a city, the other large city in southern Gaza Strip called Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis sits north, pretty much due north of Rafah. Rafah is good ways from the coast. It's down in the corner where Egypt and Israel comes together. Khan Yunis sits almost on the beach. I think the metropolitan area is on the beach of the Mediterranean, on the north side of the Israel area. Well, there's a hospital there called Shifa, very, very large hospital. They had when Israel went through Khan Yunis and then started moving on to the south, Hamas assumed that Israel would not be coming back. Well, they were wrong. Israel come back to that hospital, and it's been a treasure trove of intelligence. I think they've killed like 40 terrorists, 40 to 50 terrorists. They've had 300 surrender, and the intelligence they have gained is just tremendous from the way they're talking. So Hamas really messed up. In fact, when they interrogated, I was watching them interrogate one of the commanders, wasn't a high level, but a mid-level commander. He said, we got caught. He said, we did not expect. Israel moved in on that place. They figured that if Israel was going to come back, they'd have plenty of notice, and be able to move stuff. Israel moved in on that in 15 minutes. and they had it completely surrounded, 1 kilometer, 6/10 of a mile, all the way around that hospital, so there was no way for them to escape.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it was funny, the reporter I was listening to today said, this is something that the military strategists will be teaching in years to come, is how Israel pulled this off. So it was really a great deal, and it's a big impact on Hamas. We can expect new tactics from Hamas. They've got their backs against the wall. They're still firing rockets, and the interesting thing is that I think they know their time is limited, and I've got the wrong notes here. I'm going to have to go to my computer. We'll get back on it. The other big thing that's going on, Russia's patrolling the Syrian border now on a regular basis between Israel and Syria. So Russia's military is patrolling that area. That's a big change. The port that they're putting in on Gaza on the beach, you know, that Biden's for humanitarian, guess who's going to control it? Who's running it? Qatar, who is the major supporter of Hamas. The United States has asked them to come in. Number one, the United States says, well, help us pay for this and we'll let you run it, is what's happened. Yeah, just total disaster for Israel. Israel didn't even know that was happening until it was already a done deal. Yeah. So the thing to watch for there is we have Americans on the ground. They're going to be in harm's way. There's no doubt about it. Hamas is going to run that. Real quick, the altar for the burning of heifers is complete. Okay, you can find some of this good stuff on YouTube. Here's the interesting thing. That is a focal point for Hamas. Hamas is using that. We were just watching another follow-up thing today. I've been following this ever since it came out, back right after the attack. Hamas claimed the reason they started that war October 7th was because they were getting ready to sacrifice the heifers. It all goes back to the Temple Mount, the rebuilding of the temple, and the sanctification of the priest and the temple area. And of course, you've got the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is there, and that's where the temple's got to go. But they have built the altar on the Mount of Olives that is facing, looking directly at it. So it's an interesting thing. Here's the thing. There's only been 9 times they have done the ritual since Moses. Stop, think about that. This will be the 10th time since Moses. The other 9 times all happened before 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. There hasn't been a red heifer ceremony since 70 AD. So it's a big deal. Like I said, the dome is in the way. That's got to be resolved. How? God knows. And then here's the other thing. They're talking about that they may sacrifice that heifer this coming week because they're planning on doing it on Passover. And the other reason they've got to move forward with this is the heifers are going to get too old to be used. Right. So pay attention this next week, what's going on. It's going to be a big deal. In Europe, big thing is there, everything's still going on the way it was. I checked the map this morning or last night. The Russians, it's all red. The Russians are all doing the attacking. Ukrainians doing basically nothing. Don't believe the false news you see on some of these news accounts. Ukraine's just taking a pounding, and it's what Colonel McGregor. I was just watching him, or it's what I've heard this acronym before. They call it DIP. The military does. It's die in place. The Ukrainians are dug in. They're in trench warfare, and anytime they move, Russia pounds them. You pop your head up, you get your head blowed off. And that's what's happening. So it's a dip situation for them. In China, real quick, China, we find out, is buying up our educational platforms, especially the ones that are producing books and producing the IT stuff, the computerization programs and stuff, they're buying these companies up, have been, and still continue to do that. So they can control the education material that's being put through. The North Korea obviously is preparing to invade South Korea. We're seeing stuff every few days, new stuff popping up. So that's still a big high point of contention. You've got to remember, excuse me, they see the disarray of politics here in the States. And we've talked about this before. Odds are they're going to do something before the election. And China and North Korea, whoever, they're going to do something before the election. Kind of makes common sense. So things are heating up. Here's something that's interesting. We are permanently putting troops in Taiwan. We've been upgrading them militarily, and now we're going to permanently put troops on the island. And it's just, you know, here's the thing that I think is counterbalanced. Haven't read this anywhere, but I picked up on the news where Cuba is really just falling apart. Cuba has made an appeal to the United Nations for food. Their people are starving. People are falling out in the streets. The protests are massive. You're not seeing any of this on the news. I watched a videotape of a street just absolutely full of people down there protesting. They're starving, and things are a mess. So, who's that opened the door to down there? China. China will use the excuse, you're putting people in Taiwan, we're putting people in Cuba. And I'm sure it's going on. I haven't read that anywhere, but right. It's not going to surprise me at all when we do hear about it. Here at home, just a few things. Queer clubs in California are a big deal now in the schools. All of them, not all of them, but a lot of the elementary schools in California now have queer clubs. LBGTQ, whatever you want to call it. Queer is easier to say for me. Yeah. Here's something that's interesting. We're talking about the assault on agriculture. They are growing fat in labs, animal fat, sole purpose to put in the artificial meat that they're making to make it taste better. And it appears to be working. So they're going to take your vegetable burgers, going to add animal fat that's grown in a lab so that you'll eat it better. Okay, that's here. I mean, they're doing it. Biden sends $500 million to Bahrain over the Mideast for the sole purpose, help them make oil, get oil out of the ground. At the same time, we've been producing enough oil, even with the restrictions he's been putting on wells and stuff. We've still been producing enough oil to take care of ourselves. But that's forecast to end in 2025. So he's spending $500 million to get Bahrain production up and going, because they don't want the climate damage here, so they're going to send it overseas. Which, of course, if we're back to the point where we've got to import oil, and of course our import oil comes a half world away, no problems with that.
So that means that we'll end up buying oil off of them, giving them all that money, and we're going to turn around and buy their oil
Right.
off of them that
Right.
we paid for them to drill.
We're going to give them money to make oil for us to buy from them. $500 million to start. And like I said, we'll no longer be self-sufficient in 2025. Here's the thing I'll end with. Here's a book title, How to Blow Up Pipelines. All right? This was written by a Swedish professor. His name is Andreas Malou. He wrote it in 2021. It's a manual on how to blow up pipelines and how for terrorists to operate. It's a tech manual. It's now required reading in 16 university classrooms in the U.S. Berkeley is one of them, and that shouldn't surprise anyone. But our neighbor, University of Ohio, it's required reading in a class in the University of Ohio if you got online and started researching how to blow up a pipeline,
Be arrested.
somebody's going to show up at your door. They are teaching this in 16 universities right now here in the United States. Required reading. Just gets
Things are
crazy.
about to blow.
It's crazier every week. Yeah. Any questions on anything? I just kind of blew through it a little bit tonight.
I saw where people in the House are gonna try to bring Netanyahu to address Congress.
Yeah. That just happened. He hasn't put a formal invite out. The question was about Speaker of the House Johnson is going to invite Bibi Netanyahu to come and speak. He'd like for him to speak to a joint session of the House and the senators, but he hasn't got Schumer's, he hadn't talked to Schumer about it. Schumer has to allow that to happen for the Senate. But Johnson says he's going to put the invite out to Bibi to come in and address Congress. The reason being, this butting of heads we've got between the Biden administration and Israel is very serious.
Right.
And it's very concerning, especially to the Israelis, because they still need our support, there's no doubt about it.
Well, all this is very obvious, that who's ever running the show is to destroy this country. It's
Yeah.
like their focus point.
Yeah.
Did you see I don't have TikTok, but I saw it on, I think it was on YouTube. The young man that was, I'm not sure what country he was from, but he had said that he had studied the law of this country, and that he was announcing it basically to his co-illegal immigrants, that if you find an
Uninhabited house.
uninhabited, did you see that?
Yes.
Oh, House?
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, what's their definition of uninhabited?
Right.
What if you're gone for the day?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what Sherry's talking about, that they're pushing that illegal immigrants can be walking down a street and find an empty house and they can move into it.
Well, you saw the lady in New York and Queens that got arrested, okay, trying to run them out, and she ended up getting arrested.
Yeah.
When you were talking about vigilantes, there were two vigilantes showed up and ran these two dudes out.
Yeah,
And there's a third one saying, oh, I have a lease.
yeah.
I bet,
Yeah, and what's being talked about here is that you're seeing vigilantes now starting to show up at some of these things. Lady in New York was a prime example. And the thing we were talking about just before we started tonight was that on YouTube today, on Tom Hughes, I don't know if anybody's following Tom Hughes or not, we watch him pretty often. He was pointing out how the vigilantism is starting to put its head up here in the States. People are tired of the government allowing what's still going on, and people's going to start taking law in their own hands. It's bound to happen. People's fed up with this stuff. And so that's, you're going to see more and more of that. And it's part of this thing that in the end times, we're told how these things are going to increase, get more and more all the time. So civil unrest here, especially since we're starting to get into the spring and summer months, that's when this stuff is going to start blowing up. And you've got the election throwing fuel on it. It's just bizarre.
You couple
But-
that, Doug, with you couple that with the fact that now a judge says that illegal aliens can carry guns.
Yeah.
We have to go jump through hoops to do that.
Yeah.
But here they are giving a pass.
Yeah.
But they don't have to come across the border with an inoculation list to prove they've been inoculated against certain diseases. They can come across the border with anything.
Well, we've got some major measles outbreaks right now.
We do.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? If not, like I said, we went through this a little quick tonight, so Tom could have more time on his end, and then we'll be closing out on that and watching the CDs. Go ahead, Better.
Okay. We're going to go into Daniel chapter 3. Will be the next sequence. And as we look into this, there's some dates here that are important. Nebuchadnezzar invaded Tyre in 585 through 573 BC. Nebuchadnezzar also plunders Moab and Edom in 582. And then you have the seventh deportation. There's 745 captives, totaling 4,600 from the second, fourth, and seventh deportations. I got a list here. You can find this in Jeremiah, the 52nd chapter, verses 28 through 30. And I'll end this passage here with this quote. So Judah went into captivity away from her land. This is the number of the people Nebuchadnezzar carried into exile. In the 7th year, 3,023 Jews. In Nebuchadnezzar's 8th year, 832 people from Jerusalem. In his 23rd year, 745 Jews taken into exile by Nebuzaradan, the commander of the imperial guard. There were 4,600 people in all that left Judah. So we look at the time frame there, and now we go into the fiery furnace in Daniel, the 3rd chapter. And I want to give you a date here. The fiery furnace incident actually happens before the last time we talked. The last time we talked, it was 604 BC. Now, this happened in 586 BC. This was during the carrying away of the Jews into Palestine, or into Babylon. And it says, have a note here, Nebuchadnezzar's dream would have happened in 604 BC. So Nebuchadnezzar's dream would have taken place 18 years earlier. So it's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. But in 18 years, he forgot, about God. So Daniel 3, 1 through 3, the image would have been, we have dimensions here. According to one dimension, it was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. But there's another dimension that says it was 12 feet, 1/2 inch by 125 feet tall. Either way, it was a very, very big statue. So Daniel 3, 1 through 3. The note is at this point, let's just read it. Daniel 3, 1 through 3. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, at its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So, all those people we listed before were all gathered together for the dedication of the image of the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up for them to worship. So, we look at this. At this point, Daniel has become chief officer of the palace and the greatest counselor to the king. This promotion to the chief counselor causes great duress, and we find that later on when Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. We find that later on because they all point out, he's not supposed to be praying, but he did. And that's just, we're jumping ahead there. So this promotion to the chief counselor causes great duress to the other officials, especially those supposedly possessing magical and astrological abilities. And then the last note I have here, it's because Daniel's relation with the only true God that the magicians and astrologers were not killed. That's an interesting point. Had he not had that relationship, they would have all been drawn and quartered. And as Doug had pointed out before, what they did was they bowed 4 trees and they tied them to the 4 trees and then they cut it and ripped them apart. So it was a very gruesome. Now, in verse 1, you have a location, and it's called Dura, D-U-R-A, and it's called the plain of Dura, identified with a little tract below the area called Tikit. on the left bank of the Tigris River, southeast of Babylon. The area of Dura was known to have a mound, or an elevation where the statue would have been set up at. And so that mound provided a place for the monolithic statue to stand. So its height was already tall enough. But then you couple that with the fact they put it on a large mound. So the list of the officials carry at ceremony obligated to attend. And here's some definitions. The princes were also called satraps, and it means realm protector, who apparently in charge of a fairly large satrapies. Satrapies is an area. The definition of satrapies is a territory or a sphere under the rule of a satrap, in essence, a nation, state, or territory, such as a governor. The second definition is the word prefect, and it's borrowed from the Akkadian saknu, one who is appointed military commander or a lieutenant governor. That makes sense. In Malachi 1:8, you find the word governors, and the governors derived from the word akkad, which means lord of the administrative district, in essence, a smaller territory. And it would be like, such as Judah, a small area like that, Another word for the governors would be a viceroy. Number 4, the advisors, which is a council giver. Treasurers, treasure bearer. Judges, literally a law bearer. Magistrates is literally overchief or sheriff. And then lastly is provincial officials to have dominion over government executive, both of civic officers and wise men. And verse 4 through 7, it says, Then the herald loudly proclaimed, This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. Remember, they were from all around the world because Nebuchadnezzar had conquered a very vast domain. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that the king Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Therefore, as it's verse 7, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So you had
an orchestra.
Huh?
He had an orchestra.
Yeah, he had an
This
orchestra.
wasn't any little thing. It was a big deal.
Oh, yeah, it was a big deal. Now, verse 4, you have the word herald. Most of you know what a herald is. But the definition here, a herald were employed by the kings to announce decrees and to proclaim the king's coming, as in Malachi 3:1, Isaiah 4:30. They proclaim the opening of games, the names of the countries, of the contestants, and the rules of the contest. The point of reference in verse 6, the sound of the instruments would signal the compliance of the king's command. The participants could undoubtedly see and hear the blazing furnace nearby, which would have been a reminder of the fate of anyone not obeying. I worked at INTAT for 3 days, and I was in charge of taking the temperature of the molten metal. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but I had thick-soled boots on, and they handed me a piece of what they called lamb's wool. And I didn't think anything about it, much of it. So they said, "You'll need this."
Yeah.
And it took about 35 seconds for that instrument to register in that molten metal. Now, you understand that when you get on top of that thing, the cap on that thing is thick. I mean, it's really thick. It's thicker than it is from here to the floor. And it's massive. It's really huge. So here I have the sleeves, I have the jacket, I have the face shield, and the hat, and all this stuff, you know. And I go up there, and of course you run this long, long pole down inside here, and it starts shaking like this. Shaking, you know, because it's really boiling down there. So then you hear a little beeping, and then you pull it up, and it registers the temperature, you know. In that 35 seconds, I could not wait to get off that. My feet were on fire. And that's with the lamb's wool. And I thought, oh my word, I don't know how a person does it. While I was there, they had a man that was, when you tip those things, if you don't tip them often enough, they get a plug in them. And it's hard to imagine, you know, that really hot steel forming a plug. But they tipped this cauldron, wouldn't come out. Tipped it a little more, still wouldn't come out. The guy had a green welding jacket on, you know, so he had a face shield and all that stuff like that because you're required to wear it. And so he's standing there, and so someone says, take that long rod and bump that thing, you know, try to bust through it. Well, he did, and all that steel hit him from his face down. You know, he didn't get a blister. Not one. And they said because the steel was so hot, even though he was in a warm environment, he was so cold that the steel bounced off of him. And it was amazing. He was like, oh my word. Oh, that was a miracle. If that man wasn't, thank God, I tell you. Yeah, I thought, oh my word. Verses 8 through 12. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, all the instruments, in other words, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the blazing furnace. But there are some Jews you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Now, the term in King James Version, certain Chaldeans. The Chaldeans were an elite class of diviners, above the magicians and the astrologers. There is a sense of rivalry between the Chaldeans and the Jews, like Daniel and those deported into exile with Daniel. So there was already a resentment. You know, they resented the fact that, one, Daniel saved their bacon, you know, because he was able to, God gave him the interpretation, gave him the dream even, and was able to speak it back to Nebuchadnezzar. And as a consequence, they were all saved, you know, because of that one act. In the King James, the word, there's the accused the Jews in verse 8. Which Jews? There had to have been more than just the 3 Hebrew children. That was a note I had there, you know, because there were many more Jews that was transported there. But the Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego made it very obvious. So the rest of the Jews had bowed down. So they were the only 3 that was left. For some, now its note here is that for some reason Daniel wasn't included with the 3 Hebrew children who were in defiance to the king. Daniel's not mentioned in this passage.
Yeah, that's the only book in the Daniel, that book of Daniel, that his name's not in the chapter.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
You know, so
He must have been gone at that time. Of course, you stop and think he was put over top all the rest of them.
Right.
He was one of the head dudes. So he had probably obligations to get out and travel around to different parts of the country. This must have obviously taken place when
right.
when he was
And that's
out.
what I concluded was
Yeah.
that he was probably sent on some kind of expedition
Yeah.
or something for the king. Verse 12, there are certain Jews who pay no attention to our gods and the king's command. The question here is, how did they know that everyone was supposed to bow to the ground, that everyone hadn't done it? Typically, bowing entailed forehead to the ground in an abject surrender. And so when you see that those that adhere to Islam bow down and they touch their foreheads to the ground, that really is the abject surrender they're calling about. Now, there was 3 charges to the Jews. They have not regarded your command, verse 12. They do not serve your gods, verse 12, and they do not worship the golden image that you have set up.
Was this, in your studies, was this before or after Nebuchadnezzar's dream that was interpreted? It was after, right?
Yes. When I gave the date a while ago, when he had his dream was 604 BC,
Yeah, and this was almost
586.
almost 2 decades later.
So this is actually before he had the dream.
Yeah. So you have to stop and think. He's forgotten what the dream was about, or he has decided in his own way that, well, I'm going to make a big tall statue of me, and it's not going to just be a head of gold. The whole thing is going to be gold. And he was maybe trying to circumvent what Daniel had prophesied that was going to happen to the kingdom as time went on. So that may be where this big gold statue came from in his mind, in Nebuchadnezzar's mind.
Now, this statue he erected was actually set up in 586. His dream was in 604.
Yeah.
So you're looking at, like you said, 2 decades nearly. So now 13 through 15, and I like the way it starts. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image or of gold that I have set up?" Now, when you hear the sound of all the instruments and the image that I have made, very good, if you will bow down. But if you do not worship it, you'll be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Now, I have a note here. It says, Chaldeans, they are not listed with the soothsayers and the sages. Here they approach the king as members of a master race. Why would that be? Because they were Chaldean. Chaldean meant they were Babylonian. So, and the term is used of men of importance and high standing in the community and kingdom. The Chaldeans quoted the king's edict word for word. Isn't it interesting? Yeah. It's amazing what they can remember when they want to. The note here says, in spite of the king's rage, he gave the 3 Hebrew children an opportunity to meet his terms and escape death. So the question, now if you're ready in the King James, and in another phrasing is, who is that God that you shall deliver you out of my hand? Who is he? Verses 16 through 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up.
I think it's interesting to note. You can imagine you have this statue sitting on a knoll, like Tom's talking about, and they got this orchestra playing and everything, and they're calling everybody to bow down to it. Well, these 3 guys didn't bow down. But Nebuchadnezzar, and as you can imagine what Tom was talking about here, you got everybody with their heads down on the dirt. These three guys are standing there, so they're obvious, they are. Well, it's a whole different ball game now. You stop and think. Nebuchadnezzar didn't just take someone's word for it. He calls these three guys in to him,
Right.
giving them an opportunity to bow down, see? So not only did these guys not bow down to begin with, face to face with the king, they stood their ground. Contrast that with Peter. Peter denied, right?
Right.
He was given the same opportunity. He failed at that time. These three guys, you stop and think about it, they're in front of the king. They know what the outcome's going to be, and they stood their ground. So it's absolutely tremendous opportunity that you're seeing these three guys go through at that time.
Verses 19 through 23, you let me know when you want to quit, Doug. Okay. Then Nebuchadnezzar, full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spoke and commanded that they should heat the furnace up 7 times more than it was before. Okay, I have a note here, and I thought it was interesting. It's a historical note. When the king, full of rage, commanded the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual, he only magnified God all the more. In the song of the 3 holy children of the Apocrypha, it is stated that the servants of Nebuchadnezzar kept throwing rosin, pitch, tow, and small wood into the flame, so that the flame would stream forth above the furnace 49 cubits. This is about 102 feet. The fire was so hot that it killed those putting them in the furnace. So he was determined to prove his point. He was determined. And what he didn't realize was that God was determined he was going to make an example. And so he commanded, in verse 20, he said, he commanded the mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the fiery furnace.
That might be a good place to stop.
Okay.
Because we're going to talk quite detail after
Okay.
this. So
All right.
we've got them cast into the furnace. We'll pick up next week on what the outcome is. So as this is just a really neat area of study because, just like what I was pointing out a minute ago, you look at the determination of these people and how they could stand up, given the opportunity, knowing that they're going to be, even to the point, see, they assumed they were going to die or could die. They said, hey, even if God doesn't save us,
Right.
we're not bowing down. And what kind of faith is that? I mean,
Absolutely.
it's just tremendous. Okay, we're going to back out of this and we're going to watch our CDs tonight. So thank you at home for watching.